instead of local currencies, India could be paying in the Chinese currency, the Yuan. Indian oil has used Yuan for multiple cargoes, and the oil trade is only booming.
For the first time in decades, the yuan became the most used currency for cross-border trade with China.
Rupee has hit a fresh record low for the fourth straight session and is edging closer to the $80 mark.
To reduce the dependency on foreign currency, RBI announced the settlement of international trade in rupee. This decision as India does not have to depend on dollar to trade with other countries.
An Indian central bank, RBI, has introduced a rupee settlement system for international trade yesterday.
This move by RBI helped India to promote rupee in a global trade and grow country's economy. And because of this Rupee-Ruble trade system, the US-led sanctions against Moscow gave India a window to buy cheaper crude oil from Russia and also made the rupees more acceptable for global trade. RBI expected that this decision would support rising global interest in rupee and encourage the expansion of international trade using rupee. But things don't happen as planned. After 1 year, India has to drop the idea of trading in rupee with Russia. Yes, you heard me right. But you know what's even bad news than this? India would use Chinese currency yuan with Russia for import and export.
Indian refiners are buying Russian oil with yuan. Indian oil became the first to do so in the month of June. At least 2 private refiners have also done it.
Now we all know that we started using yuan for the trade instead of rupee, but it is also essential that we understand what's the mechanism behind all this, and this is what exactly we will going to understand in this episode. 1. Why did RBI consider reviving the Rupee-Ruble system? 2. What is the Rupee-Ruble mechanism and how does it work? 3. What exactly happened in 1 year that India approved yuan payment for purchase of Russian oil? And finally, what's wrong with the Indian rupee? There are 2 reasons why RBI considered reviving this Rupee-Ruble system. 1. After Russia-Ukraine war, Western countries imposed the sanctions on Russia and banned Russia from the There are 2 reasons why RBI considered reviving this Rupee-Ruble system. 1. After Russia-Ukraine war, Western countries imposed the sanctions on Russia and banned Russia from the SWIFT network. As a result, Russia cannot use dollar for international payments. 2. When oil price spike all across the world due to the supply concern after Russia-Ukraine war situation, Russia offered India discounted oil. But because we could not use dollar as SWIFT network banned Russia, with the solution, which is international trade in rupee, and with the help of this settlement, not only India will be able to trade with Russia even after all those sanctions, but India can also promote rupee as international currency. But you know what guys, there is a problem because Russia was suspended from a SWIFT network, which is the global financial system that allows the smoother transaction to money across the world, cannot be used to make the transactions with Russia. Now the question over here is, if we can't make the transactions using SWIFT network, then how did we make the transactions? And the answer is using Vostro account. Vostro account is an alternative payment system that used for the bilateral trade between India and Russia to avoid the sanctions. With the help of this Vostro account, instead of paying and receiving US dollar, now invoice, wire transfers, business transactions and deposit fund will be done in Indian rupee. But you'll ask what actually the Vostro account is and how does it work? Vostro account is a bank account held by one bank on behalf of other bank, typically in foreign currency. Still confused? Try this. Imagine a Russian businessman want to import goods from India, and for that he needs to pay Indian company in rupee, but he does not have the rupee. So Russian businessman has to go to Russian bank and ask them to open Vostro account for him in Indian bank. Once Vostro account is opened, he can transfer ruble from his Russian bank account to Vostro account. Indian bank will then hold the rupee on Russian businessman's behalf. When he want to pay to Indian company, he can simply instruct and bank will transfer his money to the account to whomever he is purchasing or he want to purchase a product. Now as the Vostro account is clear, let's ahead with the video.
India's currency rupee is set to get used in international trade with some countries. days after India's central bank approved banks to open 5 Vostro accounts for trade with Sri Lanka.
You know what? Because of this India-Russia bilateral trade, not only India's annual trade with Russia has reached more than tripled from $13 billion to $44 billion in one fiscal year. But Russia also overtook Iraq for the first time as the top oil supplier for India in 2022 and 2023.
India's import of cheap Russian oil that reached a new high in May, surpassing the combined purchase from Saudi Arabia, Iraq and the United Arab Emirates and the United States as well.
In August last year, India imported around 730,000 barrels per day from Russia. In June this year, it hit 2 million barrels per day. Russia now makes up 42% of India's crude imports.
If we have increased the trade with Russia 3 times because of this international rupee trade system, then what exactly happened after 1 year that Russia has to drop the idea of trading in rupee and start demanding yuan for import and export? But you know what the bigger concern? Why would India pay Chinese currency yuan for trade, especially when we have a tense situation with China due to border dispute? And Indian government had asked Indian banks and businesses to avoid using yuan to pay for Russian imports in March.
In March, the Indian government had warned precisely against this. Don't use the yuan for oil trade. And the reason is quite simple. China is trying to internationalize the yuan to challenge the US dollar. Why should India help China achieve that goal?
And long-running political differences with its neighbor have led India to discourage using Chinese currency yuan. The country has asked banks and traders to avoid using Chinese yuan to pay for Russian imports.
To understand why we have to use yuan, we need to understand 2 things. First, the nature of India-Russia trade. No doubt the trade had increased, but it is mostly one way. What does that mean by one way? See, Russia's export to India are much higher than Russia's import from India. And because of this massive import-export gap between India and Russia, trade deficit with Russia has reached $34 billion. It means India buying more than India is selling to Russia. Second, due to surging Russian oil imports by India, Russia has received billions of Indian rupees, but they don't have much to buy from India.
As for the rupees, this is a problem because we accumulated billions of rupees on the accounts in the Indian banks, and we need to use this money, but for this, these rupees must be transferred in another currency, and this is being discussed now.
As per the Bloomberg estimates, with this high import-export gap, Russia has rupees surplus worth of $40 billion in 1 year, and that add up to the 147 billion worth of Indian rupees in Russia's net foreign asset in 2022. And this is lot of unused cash stuck in the bank because Russia don't have much to buy from India. You would say, what's the big deal in it? If Russia has this much of Indian rupees, why don't Russia convert these $1 billion worth of rupees into ruble and use it? Well, it's not like that Russia does not want to convert this rupee either, but there are 2 obstacles. One, India has restrictions over converting large amount of money in one financial year. Second, rupee is partially convertible currency. What does that mean by partial convertible currency? We'll explain that at the end of the video. But as Russia is demanding yuan for the trade, it's not that Chinese currency yuan is fully convertible. It is also partially convertible. But you know what's the difference and why Russia is demanding yuan? One, even though Chinese trade deficit with Russia reached $38 billion last year after global energy price surged, but where India exports only around $3 billion worth of product to Russia, China export around $75 billion worth of product, which is 25 times more than India's exports. Second, Indian currency is acceptable only in 18 countries, but at the same time, Chinese currency is acceptable in more than 100 countries. So, Yuan has the flexibility to not just trade with China, but 100 other existing trading partners as well. And these are the two main reasons why Russia is demanding yuan instead of rupees. And as of now, we are using yuan or dirham. India is also trying to work out on how Russia can use its mounting rupee in the bank account. And for that, India offered them to invest in the India's capital market and Indian infrastructures project in exchange of the equity stakes. But as Russia is demanding for the hard cash, as they want to use that money, and in future they want to avoid these situations of stacking money in the bank account, Russia is demanding the yuan. Even though we have to use the yuan as of now, but India is aggressively working to make rupees more acceptable for the international trade. But do you know where we failed to make rupee more acceptable and India again has to use other currency like yuan or dirham for the important exports? The main one thing for that is India rupee is not fully convertible or partially convertible. And if you look at the India's share of global export of the goods is barely about 2%. Compare this to dollar, the dollar shares of global export is around 88%. For euro it's 31%, for yen it's 17%, and for pound it is 13%. And these factors reduce the necessity for other country to hold the rupees, which is sort of the mass withdrawal capital and massive exchange rate of volatility. And these are the main two reasons why mostly countries use dollar or currency like UAE dirham, which is widely acceptable for global trade, that can be used, not stuck in the accounts. And even though we would use yuan or dirham for the export of the oil, India's bureaucrats pointed out that we can push for the rupees acceptance in the international trade, but we must do a lot of groundwork to make rupees more acceptable currency.